Many people have been brainwashed by a huge lie since they were young, worked hard to get rich. The more those poor people at the bottom, the more they believe in this sentence. They work very hard every day, work from dawn to dusk, and work hard. Year after year, they live like this. Not only do they not get rich, but the money they earn is almost only enough to support their families. I believe this is the portrayal of many people, especially those in rural areas. I have seen too many. Why? Because that is fundamentally wrong. It is just a rhetoric used to coax the bottom level people to work honestly. The truth of the world is that hard work makes you poor, not rich. The truth of the world is that 90% of people who work hard feed the 10% who get nothing. And the purpose of these 90% of people is to help the other 10% live better. Then these 10% of people rack their brains to design various rules to restrict and control 90% of people. The wealth of the rich comes from the labor of the poor. The harder the poor work, the richer the rich become. This is the so-called getting rich through hard work. Understand? Many of the education we have received since we were young are actually designed by a few people. If those poor people have money in their hands, who will work for him, and who will work hard for him? The biographies of those celebrities you have seen, as long as they say that they made money through hard work, it must be nonsense. Rich people won't let you know the truth about how they got rich. Their attitude towards the poor at the bottom is to hide as much as they can, and cheat as much as they can. What is the greatest wealth owned by the rich? It's not money, it's not a mansion, and it's not all kinds of resources. The greatest wealth owned by the rich is the poor, and the concept of being the poor will not change. The notion of the poor being played by the game is the source of the game designer's interest. Most of what you believe is what others make you believe. What you think is what other people make you think. What you know is what others let you know. Most people live in a designed game. Mobilize the interests of the upper class, and they will fight you desperately. Change the concept of the lower class, and they will fight you desperately. The concept of the poor at the bottom cannot be changed. If they can be changed, they will not be poor. They don't know at all that their own ideas are the source of other people's interests. It is precisely because these concepts of the poor cannot be changed, and the interests of the upper class are so difficult to be shaken. The biggest difference between people of different classes lies in whether they are doing bureaus or doing things. The upper level people are in charge, and they make full use of capital and manpower. People at the bottom do things, they are just a tool in the bureau. You work hard, nothing more than a tool for hard work. This has been the case since ancient times. More than 2,000 years ago, this sentence appeared in the Analects of Confucius, only the superior wisdom and the inferior fool remain unchanged. During the Yongzheng period of the Qing dynasty, the desire to promote the integration of officials and gentry into one errand and one payment of grains moved the interests of officials and gentry, and there was great resistance. In their eyes, the poor are serving the upper class, which is justified. Is it very worrying? That's right. Now that you know this, you have to accept it? If you can't accept it, then you should stop reading my article, because you are hopeless. I tell you the truth of the world, the naked truth, so that you don't stay at the bottom all the time. Accept the truth first, and then figure out what to do about it. This is why I always say that working part-time cannot get rich, and part-time work has no future. Because this is a strange article, with a length of 17,000 words. If you can finish reading this article, you will be able to refresh your three views and subvert the conceptual framework of your own history and civilization from the source. The details of the article are vividly described, the viewpoints are novel but the arguments are solid, like a mystery novel, which deduces and analyzes the history of the ancient Yin, Shang, and Zhou dynasties. Part 1-01. Wen Wan Gossip. It is said that King Wen of Zhou was released by Shang Zhou after he ate his son's flesh reluctantly. This seems to be an unofficial legend. But in the remains of the Yin ruins and oracle bone documents of merchants, this kind of behavior is very common. More than 1,000 years BC, the age of King David of Israel in the Old Testament, the legendary era of Fen Shenyanyi. King Zhou of Shang, who was in his prime, came to rule the world and ruled the North China plain at the easternmost point of the Eurasian continent. Shang Dynasty's situation map. At this time, King Wen of Zhou was just the chief of a small tribe far away in the western frontier, today's Shaanxi. For several generations, the Zhou clan had submitted to the Shang dynasty. King Wen Zhouchang was over 50 years old. He was already a full-fledged old man at that time, and he was also obsessed with weird gossip divination, which enveloped this small state of chaos with depression. A merchant army suddenly drove to the west, arrested Zhou Chang, and escorted him to Kaohsiung, the capital of the Shang dynasty. This is a usual punishment for businessmen. For hundreds of years, King Shang maintained his rule in this way over the hundreds of states and tribes he conquered. This time the results were quite different. 02. Dusty Nightmare. Today, 3,000 years later, in the Yin ruins of Anyang, Henan, the last capital of the Yin and Shang dynasties is buried in the Loess, Kaohsiung. Yin ruins in Anyang, Henan. For a century, archaeologists have unearthed an astonishing number of slaughtered corpses here, and the oracle bones unearthed together show that they died in the bloody sacrifice ceremony of the merchants. Numerous bones tell the world, the forgotten bloody civilization is buried here, and the long and terrifying years are like nightmares. Next to a palace in the Yin ruins, more than 100 sacrificial pits were unearthed, and nearly 600 bones were murdered. Most of these bones were separated from the body and head, and were thrown into the pit after beheading. 17 young children were also buried in the two pits. The laying of the foundation of the palace was also accompanied by murder sacrifices. A corpse was rammed under all the pillars. The gate was built on the remains of 15 people, 3 of whom had only heads. Photographs from the excavation of Yin ruins in the 1930s. There is a human sacrifice field in the tomb area of the king of Shang, which is more than twice as large as the playground. Nearly 3,500 human bones were unearthed and buried in more than 900 sacrificial pits. There are many corpses with different heads. In some pits, only skulls or bodies are buried, or even living people buried in struggle. There were also sacrifices outside the Wangling area. For example, in a pit in Hugang, the skeletons of 73 persons were buried. Most of them were male teenagers under the age of 20, and there were even more than a dozen skeletons of young children. Wherever the merchant culture went, such as the early Shang dynasty ruins in Yanji, Henan, Zhengzhou, and even Tongshan, Jiangsu in the southeast, there are also large-scale human sacrifice sites. Years of natural changes and man-made ruins have destroyed the ruins of the Yin ruins. It is impossible to know how many such human sacrifice sites there were in the entire Shang dynasty. The times of these ruins are different in the morning and evening, which shows that the practice of human sacrifice has continued for many years. Far from being the whim of some tyrant, it is the norm of a civilization. But before it was uncovered by archaeologists' shovels, ancient Chinese historical documents never mentioned this custom of merchants. The sacrificial pit in the ruins of the Yingzi royal tomb in Anyang. After King Wen's son, King Wu of Zhou destroyed Shang, Kaohsiung city was abandoned and buried, and this custom of merchants also disappeared like a cloud of smoke. But why did people in the Zhou dynasty delete their memory of that bloody era? What does this have to do with their rise, destruction of Shang, and establishment of the Zhou dynasty? Oracle bone inscriptions and archaeological excavations ask us these questions. If you try to answer it, you must also collect rare and misty information from ancient Confucian scriptures and ancient historical documents, combine them with archaeological materials, and restore the nightmare that has been lost for 3,000 years. Know the truth. Code recognition and collection of the author Li Shou's masterpiece Jian Shang. 03. The Shang dynasty and its subjects, Jiang, Zhe. Merchants arose in the east. The core area of their rule is in the northeast of Henan province today, which belongs to the east of the Chinese world. For the foreign races in the west, merchants call them Jiang. This is just a general term. Jiang people include countless loose ethnic states and tribes that do not belong to each other. 3 ways of writing Jiang in oracle bone inscriptions. 200 years before King Zhou of the Shang dynasty, a queen of the Shang King Pu Hao led an army to conquer the west and expanded the power of the Shang dynasty to the Jiang area. That expedition was the largest in the oracle bone texts, with an army of 13,000 men. Compared with the barbarians in the west, merchants have advanced bronze smelting technology, and their weapons are strong and sharp. They also have a unique technology for recording language, writing, thus forming a huge military and administrative machine, as well as a civilization with a high degree of division of labor. This is beyond the imagination of the wild tribe. Fu Hao tomb. Fu Hao led 13,000 troops to attack Bujia in the Jiang side, Xian Zhen, Deng Fu Hao 3,000 Deng Luwen, Hufa, Jiang. Merchants have never used their own culture to change the minds of barbarians. They just want to keep the military conquest. The king of Shang used to lead the army to patrol the frontier, deter the surrounding small states with force, keep them submit, and if necessary, carry out disciplinary wars like killing chickens to scare monkeys. The homeland of the Shang dynasty was not much larger than today's Henan province. As for the western tribe of Zhou, businessmen are a little confused about its origin, because it is too small. The epics of the Zhou people tell their own early history, and they are also mixed with a lot of mythology. Legend has it that the ancestor of the Zhou clan was a woman named Zhang Yuan. She stepped on the footprints of giants in the wilderness, conceived and gave birth to a son Haoji, and the Zhou clan was multiplied. In Shang and Zhou languages, Zhang is Jiang, so Zhou people also belong to Jiang people in a broad sense. After they formed a tribe, they gave themselves the surname Ji and called other tribes around them Zhang. This marks that the blood relationship between them has been alienated and they can intermarry. According to Western customs, people with the same surname and family cannot intermarry. It was not until the generation of King Wenzhou Chang's grandfather, Gugong Danfu, that there were relatively reliable records. The Zhou people used to live in the deep mountains, no different from the barbaric peoples, in fact, they're close relatives, the Jiang people. Gugong Danfu led his people to move out of the mountains, followed a small river to the edge of the Weihua plain, and began to carry out agricultural reclamation. From then on, he left the barbarism and entered a more civilized way of life. These epics, tinged with Zhou self-boasting, are only partially reliable. According to archaeological excavations, the civilizations in the Weihua River basin in Guangzhou during this period were similar in form, with only a few thousand or more than 10,000 people in each ethnic group, living a life of planting millet and sorghum, and raising cattle and sheep. Their main agricultural tools are polished stone tools, and they use rough gray pottery for their homes. The upper patriarchs only have a little luxury imported from other places, such as jade and copper ware. The Zhou people were not much more civilized than their Jiang neighbors. In the eyes of businessmen, they are all equally backward, and they are not worthy opponents at all. The biggest change that Gugong Danfu brought to the Zhou family was that he took refuge in the powerful Shang dynasty and became the ruling agent of merchants in the far west. Bronze Ge, unearthed from the tomb at Yin ruins, Xiaotun village, Anyang, Henan. Bronze Roundzu, unearthed from the tomb of Fuhao at the Yin ruins in Xiaotun village, Anyang, Henan. Fuhao bronze ring foot cup, unearthed from the tomb of Fuhao at the Yin ruins in Xiaotun village, Anyang, Henan. Fuhao Fang Ding, unearthed from the tomb of Fuhao at the Yin ruins in Xiaotun village, Anyang, Henan. At that time, the Zhou clan was just a small tribe with more than 10,000 people. What use was it to the huge Shang dynasty that ruled millions of people? As revealed by the archaeological excavations of the Yin ruins, merchants believed that God and ancestor gods ruled all misfortunes and blessings in the world, and the flesh and blood of aliens was the best gift dedicated to God and ancestors. The word sacrifice in oracle bone inscriptions, it is to hold a piece of meat in one hand and offer it to the altar. The main source of their sacrificial servants is the Jiang people. In the records of human sacrifices in oracle bone inscriptions, Jiang people accounted for more than half of the victims. They are called human sacrifices. Oracle bone inscription sacrifice. After Danfu led the Zhou people to join the merchants, his main duty was to provide the Jiang people for the Shang dynasty. This is a history that was deliberately buried and forgotten by the Zhou people later, but the unearthed oracle bone inscriptions leaked a little information. The Zhou clan themselves had no written language. The word Zhou in oracle bone inscriptions was created by merchants. Merchants have a special verb for killing and offering sacrifices, use. Numerous oracle bone inscriptions about sacrifices record that Shang kings used Jiang men, women, cattle, and sheep as offerings to the gods. Zhou in oracle bone inscriptions is a co-writing of the two characters yang and mouth. The interpretation of Zhou in Zhouanjizi is also from the use and from the mouth. In the eyes of businessmen, the characteristic of the Zhou family is the population that pays for use. There is an even more terrifying way of writing the word Zhou for businessmen. The small squares of the word yang are full of dots. The dots in the oracle bone inscriptions represent blood, which comes from slain human animals and is the freshest diet of the gods. The oracle bone inscriptions also specifically describe blood sacrifices. On a raised altar, blood represented by dots is dripping down. Inscription oracle, collected by Yin Ruins Museum. In terms of blood relationship, The behavior of Gugong Danfu and the Zhou people is a shameless betrayal of the people in their hometown. By hunting the Jiang people, the Zhou family became the bloody agents of the Shang dynasty in the west, and they also received corresponding rewards. Sharp copper weapons can help them capture prey. The military technology of merchant horse-drawn chariots may have also been imported into the Zhou people at this time. For 3 generations and nearly 100 years since Dan's father, the people of Zhou have been trying their best to follow the Shang dynasty. According to traditional marriage customs, the leader of the Zhou clan should marry his wife surnamed Zhang every other generation. Dan's father's wife was from the Jiang people, which shows that he had not betrayed the Western allies when he got married. However, his son Jili and grandson Zhou Chang, Wen Wang, both married their wives from the east, which showed their attitude of taking refuge in the Shang dynasty. Zhou people claimed that the 2 ladies were merchants, and even the daughters of Shang kings. This is just their bragging to the surrounding Jiang people. The merchant practiced intra-clan marriage, strictly protecting the purity of his noble blood, and would never marry the daughter of the royal family to a barbarian far away. The businessman's surname is Zi, and the 2 wives of Jili and Zhou Chang, whose surnames are Ren and Si respectively, are only from a small peripheral country that surrendered to Shang. However, the mother country of the 2 wives, Ren and Si, is still much more advanced than the people of Zhou. In the eyes of Zhou people, they are like goddesses who descended from the heavens. Later epics are full of praises for them, and they are even called the Ren and the Si, Book of Songs Daisaki Historical Records, Zhou Benji. 2 generations of Oriental brides have brought great changes to the upper class of the Zhou clan. The husband may not understand the language of his wife's family, but the mother will inevitably influence the son's generation in an all-round way. Eastern culture followed them to the west, and the most mysterious and advanced technique was oracle bone divination, which combined writing, divination, and spirit communication with ghosts and gods, and was brought to the extreme by businessmen. Among them, the part that interprets and calculates the lines of oracle bones belongs to Bagua. When Wen Wang Zhou Chang was old, he became obsessed with this mysterious computing technology from the east. As a result, the fate of Zhou people and ancient China began to change. Shang dynasty people divination oracle bones. 04. King Wen's ambition, gossip. King Wen Zhouchang inherited the position of patriarch when he was young. In fact, his father, Jili, probably died young and never became a patriarch. Jili's wife and Zhouchang's mother Duran came from the east, and the Shang dynasty obviously supported the young Zhouchang as the head of the Zhou clan. After he became an adult, he continued to marry his wife the Si from the east, which was also following the policy of his grandfather and father to seek refuge in the Shang dynasty, while safeguarding his own authority. Those who master the techniques of oracle bone divination and gossip calculation are all wizard families, and they have passed on this job from generation to generation, keeping it as a family secret. It is said in later generations that King Wen of Zhou deduced gossip into 64 hexagrams when he was imprisoned by Shang Zhou. This statement may have a certain origin, but Zhou Chang's contact with and calculation of gossip must have started earlier. It can be imagined that when the elderly Zhou Chang became interested in gossip, he must have used both soft and hard tactics against the fortune teller, using various means, and finally forced them to confess the principle of the operation of the hexagrams. Tai Chi 8 diagrams. In the Shang and Zhou dynasties, there were occasional upper-class people who were obsessed with divination, but the astonishing move of the elderly Zhou Chang was the inspiration to betray the Shang dynasty and replace it. This obviously goes far beyond the duty of being a merchant's vassal, and deviates from the foundation of the country since my grandfather and father. How Zhou Chang deduced and demonstrated it is now unknown. However, the part of Zhuci in the existing Book of Changes is said to be written by Wen Wang Zhou Chang, and some of the words in it do show disobedience, such as Yi Jianho, assume the throne, Jianho Xingji and other words, has obviously exceeded the duty of a courtier, and is full of rebellious and murderous intentions. Tun, Lu, Yu hexagrams. The Tusi of multiple hexagrams all show that the northeast loses friends, and the southwest gains friends. The northeast is unfavorable and the opportunity is in the southwest. Hebei, the center of merchant rule, was just to the northeast of the Zhou people. This undoubtedly indicated that the opportunity to break with the Shang king had arrived, and it was necessary to contact the Jiang people in the west and even various ethnic groups in the mountains in the southwest as allies. Later, when King Wu destroyed the Shang dynasty, the peoples of Shu, Wei, and Wei in the southwest did participate in the war. Kun, Jian, and Jihua, the word benefiting the Great River appeared the most in King Wen's Chuan Ci. From Guangzhou to the capital of Shang, Keoch must cross the Yellow River. Zhou people who are accustomed to living in mountains are not familiar with water. This is obviously the most concerned issue of the elderly Zhou Chang, Need, Li, Tongren, Gu, Dehu, Yi, Ding, Huan, Zongfu and other hexagrams. Zhou Chang, who was obsessed with hexagram calculus, at one point, fortune tellers he asked for advice came from the east controlled by merchants, and they had close ties with their counterparts in their hometown. It is entirely possible that the disobedience of the old patriarch of the Zhou people was transmitted to Chao Ji through the fortune teller's communication network, and the chief priest of the Shang dynasty was the king of Shang. So, the Shang army took Lao Zhouchang away. The oracle bones, Shang and Wuding periods, collected by the National Museum of China. Documents such as historical records did not say that this was a war at all. Maybe the Shang army came to the Zhou clan just like they used to expropriate the Jiang people's sacrifices, and took Zhou Chang away by the way. Judging from the comparison of strength at the time, old Zhou Chang's idea of rebellion was really whimsical. All the Zhou people, including his sons later Wu Wangfa, Zhou Gongdan, etc. were obviously horrified by the idea. The ease with which Zhou Chang was taken away by the merchant army's law enforcement is enough to show how deeply the Zhou people were shocked. They simply did not have the strength and courage to follow the leader and fight against the merchants. Zhou Chang was captured and left all the problems to his sons. His wife Da Si gave birth to several sons for Zhou Chang. The eldest son Bo Yukeo, and the sons Zhou Fa and Zhou Dan had grown up at this time. The only thing they can do is to go to Keoch to intercede with King Zhou of Shang, begging him to forgive Zhou Chang for his delusions due to his old age and confusion. Historical records that several courtiers, Hong Yao, San Yishan, etc., who defected from the Shang dynasty to Zhou dynasty brought gifts to Shangdu to pray to King Zhou. This is obviously not the whole truth. Seeing traitorous officials will only increase Shang Zhou's anger, not to mention that it is difficult for the Zhou family to attract Shang defectors at this time. Shang Zhou was a very smart man, knowledge is enough to avoid remonstrance, and words are enough to cover up wrongs. If Zhou Chang's sons did not show up, he would certainly not forgive the Zhou people. Historical records Yin Benji. Inscribed oracle bone, collected by Yin Ruins Museum. The humiliating experience of King Wen's sons going to Keoch this time was only concealed after they destroyed the business and seized the world. In fact, what they experienced in Keoch was not only grievances and humiliation, but also a bloody tragedy like a nightmare. 05. Tianyi Merchants, Keoch Ghost World. According to sporadic records in old history, after Zhou Chang's eldest son Boyai passed the imperial examination, he was executed by King Zhou of Shang and made into meat sauce. Zhou Chang was released only after eating his son's flesh in pain, Huang Fumi's Emperor's Century. This is indeed too absurd, it seems that it can only be relegated to unofficial history. But with the archaeological discoveries and oracle bone documents in the Yin ruins today, we know that this kind of behavior is no longer normal for businessmen. For decades, the Zhou people had been supplying the Shang with Jiang captives. Zhou people may have some vague understanding of the fate of these people in Keoch, but they don't have a very specific perception, because there are no merchants' human sacrifice places in the West. Only after old Zhou Chang and his sons arrived at Keoch one after another, did they witness with their own eyes the fate of the captives who were given to the merchants by themselves. According to oracle bone inscriptions, there are many ways for merchants to sacrifice living people. The more common one is the Mao sacrifice. This character is the shape of a person or livestock that has been cut in half and hung in half after the internal organs have been emptied, just like the pigs and sheep hanging on the slaughtering line today. In fact, Jiang captives were often killed together with oxen and sheep for Mao sacrifice. Oracle bone rubbings. Other ways of offering sacrifices include offering the entrails, blood, and heads of human animals. Methods of processing human animals include grilling, boiling soup and stewing, air drying into bacon, etc., all of which have special bone inscriptions. These are all methods of processing food, because they are the diet offered to the gods. According to custom, the deity also bestows blessings on the sacrifices, so after the ceremony, the sacrificer share the offerings. This naturally leads to a terrifying inference: businessmen, especially upper-class businessmen, are likely to be cannibals. But it's not just archaeological evidence. According to historical documents, Bo Yi cow was made into meat sauce, Another small monarch Hao who had a dissatisfaction with King Zhou was also made into jerky and distributed to other kings for food. According to the concept of businessmen, the chiefs and nobles of foreign races are the highest level of human sacrifices. They call such chiefs Fangbo. No amount of ordinary human sacrifices is worth a Fangbo. Zhou Chang or his successors are exactly a Jiang Fangbo in the eyes of businessmen. Oracle bone rubbings. But why was it Bo Uko who was used this time, and not his younger brother Wu Wangfa, Zhou Gongdan, or the old Zhou Chang himself who caused this turmoil? In the ancient times in the Jewish Old Testament, God most liked to accept the firstborn as a sacrifice. Merchants may not have this kind of etiquette, but they do like to use young and middle-aged men or children as sacrifices, and rarely use the elderly. For some specific gods, young women are used. Moreover, businessmen are accustomed to using divination to choose sacrifices. They should have carefully investigated and calculated the brothers such as Boyikao, Zhou Fa, and Zhou Dan to determine who is the most suitable for making meat sauce. After all, the cattle and sheep used for sacrifice should be carefully inspected in advance to check their coat color, fatness, and thinness, and whether there are scars or hidden diseases. This kind of record is not uncommon in spring and autumn. The steamed human head is contained in the bronze jar, and this sacrificial article has been unearthed more than once in the Yin ruins. How did the sons of old Zhou Chang go through this test, and how did they feel? Others will never know. In any case, old Zhou Chang regained his freedom. Moreover, he and his sons had a windfall. First of all, King Zhou of Shang was very satisfied with their repentance, especially Zhou Chang's performance of eating his son's flesh. This probably symbolizes his attitude of sincerely assimilating into the civilized world of merchants. King Zhou granted Zhou Chang the status of Zibo, allowing him to manage a wider range of Western affairs on behalf of the Shang dynasty. Also, during this trip to Kaohsiung, Zhou Chang and his son had the opportunity to observe the top businessmen face to face. In addition to those bloody sacrifices that were enough to drive people crazy, they also discovered that the Shang dynasty was far from the Tianyi Shang they imagined when they were in the western frontier, the sacred city suspended in the sky like a fairyland. Although the place is magnificent, all the people, from Shang Zhou to his brothers, children, and relatives, are as ordinary as Zhou people, without any sacredness. Most importantly, the merchant world is not a cohesive whole. As with any patriarch or chief, if not worse, King Zhou was surrounded by disaffected brothers and clan members, and his sons fought openly and secretly for succession. Hong Yao, and other officials of the Shang dynasty who were secretly flirting with the Zhou people should have established contact with Zhou Chang and his sons at this time. Wu Gan, the son of Shang Zhou, the puppet supported by King Wu of Zhou after he destroyed Shang, must have tried to win over the Zhou people at this time, not to mention those uncles and brothers of Shang Zhou who were already dissatisfied, such as Bigan who was executed later. In these people's view, the Zhou people and their western relatives, the Jiang tribe, might be a potential force that could be used. If King Zhou of Shang insisted on going his own way and did not respect the interests of these nobles, it would be necessary to contact foreign races and cooperate internally and externally to launch a coup. Neither King Zhou of Shang nor the pretenders around him thought of the possible dangers of supporting the Zhou family. Merchants have dominated the Central Plains for 600 years, and there has never been any external threat to shake its rule. Moreover, businessmen agree that the gods and gods in the heavens rule over all the misfortunes and fortunes in the world. The dead Shang kings and nobles of all dynasties also entered the heavens and became gods, possessing different divine powers. Those gods are very realistic and only bless those who make sacrifices to them. The more human sacrifices, cattle and sheep are sacrificed, the happier the gods will be, and they will ensure that the sacrificers enjoy everything in the world. The most important job of King Shang is to offer sacrifices to the gods of heaven, earth, mountains, and rivers, and ancestors. The schedule of sacrifices is full, just like a nutritionist's menu. According to oracle bone inscriptions, the king of Shang would sacrifice 3,000 human sacrifices and 1,000 cows at a time. The oracle bone inscriptions that can be preserved to the present are only a drop in the bucket, and this is certainly not the largest sacrifice of a merchant. Since the king of Shang monopolized the power to offer sacrifices to the gods, he also enjoyed the blessings of the gods alone, so he naturally wanted to conquer all the nations on the land. Of course, this is also to provide more sacrifices to the gods. In this way of thinking, businessmen naturally became a nation known for its indulgence. People and nations who offer sacrifices to the gods can be blessed by God, so they don't have to take into account any moral precepts, let alone worry about future troubles. Historical records various absurd behaviors such as the construction of wine pools and meat forests by King Zhou, and the group fornication of naked men and women. In fact, this is the same as his story of digging the bones to see the marrow. It concentrates the ugliness of the entire Shang family on one person. All kinds of torture and bloody sacrifices are entertainment methods of merchants, not King Zhou alone. Jade Man, unearthed from Xiaotan village, Anyang, Henan. Jeju, unearthed in the north of Xiaotan village, Anyang, Henan. They are also addicted to alcoholism from top to bottom, and there are few sober people all day long. Since the reign of King Zhou, the number of human animals from the west has been decreasing, but the grains used as raw materials for winemaking have been increasing. After Zhou Chang's work was suspended, King Zhou is trying to open up a new source of human animals in the southeast. The nobles under the Shang king became minor gods after death, but they must also protect the future Shang kings, not just their own descendants. More than 200 years before King Zhou, King Pan Geng of Shang had just moved his capital to Keoj, and most of the nobles around him were dissatisfied. Pan Geng called them together to give a lecture, and openly threatened, "Don't think that your dead ancestors will help you, because they were all by my late king's side and enjoyed the sacrifices I offered, so they will give priority to protecting me Pan Geng, not pamper you. Hereby I will enjoy it greatly with the ancestors, and my ancestors will enjoy it with them. For blessings and disasters, I dare not use non-virtue. I tell you that if you are in trouble, if you have the ambition to shoot." It is said that merchants were a nation of animal husbandry and commerce in the early days, so they regarded the ruled people as livestock, and used the thinking of businessmen to deal with the gods. Shanhai Jingda Huangdong Jing, Shi Ben Zhou Pian. King Zhou of the Shang dynasty felt that the world belonged to him alone, and other merchant nobles also believed that the throne could only be passed on among the merchants. Zhou people are just their tools, and they will never have the possibility of climbing to the master's seat. 06. Taigong Conspiracy. When Zhou Chang and his sons were circling around in Keoj, they may have also met a figure who later participated in rewriting history together, that is Taigong Lu Shang, the so-called Zhang Taigong in later generations. The surname of his family is Zhang, and he belongs to the traditional alliance of the Zhou people, the Jiang people. Portrait of Zhang Taigong. Historical records said that Taigong Lu Shang was a native of the East China Sea. He was reused when he met King Wen while fishing by the Weishui River. This narrative mode comes from the lobbyist's story in Warring States Policy, which is not convincing. In the later unofficial history novel Feng Shen Yan Yi, there is a story about Zhang Taigong who sold flour and worked as a butcher in Keoj City. During the Shang and Zhou dynasties, it was impossible to change hereditary class status, and there would be no upstarts born in the common people. The Taigong must have come from the Lu clan among the Jiang people, and he was the son of a typical Jiang Fangbo. But this does not rule out that Taigong had the experience of living in Keoj. It is conclusively recorded in historical records that Zhang Taigong played a great role in the later Zhou people's business destruction, especially provided many conspiracy secrets. Power is all based on the conspiracy of Zhang Taigong. This kind of conspiracy and calculation is incompatible with the simple life of the Jiang and Zhou people in the western mountains. Only the civilized world can produce such dark and calculating people. Then, why did Taigong Lu Shang, who was born in the upper class of the Jiang people, have such a complicated and elusive experience, and finally came together with the Zhou people? Combining the work done by the Zhou people for the Shang dynasty in the past, it can be speculated that Taigong, as the son of the leader of the Lu clan of the Jiang people, may have been captured or ensnared by the Zhou people, and then sent to Keoj as a human sacrifice. Both Taigong and King Wen were young at that time. But some accidents made him lucky to save his life. For example, the result of divination was not suitable for sacrifice, etc., so he lived as a pariah in Keoj City until he met the escorted old Zhou Chang and his sons who followed. Keoj, present-day Qi County, Henan Province. In this case, the re-meeting between the elderly Taigong and Zhou Chang in Keoj City must be very dramatic, especially after the old Zhou Chang and his sons experienced various encounters as Jiang Fangbo and Bo Yikao was used. The details of this meeting have been confused in various legends and cannot be recovered, but the ending is very clear. These people who had the same tragic experience reached a consensus. The Taigong forgave the past atrocities of the Zhou people and approved of the old Zhou Chang's dream of destroying business, although the motivation came from gossip calculations that he might not understand. He quietly returned to the west with Zhou Chang and his sons, and joined in the great cause of destroying business. With the horror, sorrow, new knowledge, and harvest of Zhou, old Zhou Chang and the remaining sons returned to their hometown. When they left, there was only worry and despair, but when they returned, they were united and led the whole family into the gambler career, Jian Shang. Code recognition and collection of the author Li Shou's masterpiece Jian Shang. This cause has already engulfed various political forces, including the Zhou people, from the Shang capital in the east to the distant mountains in the west. Once started, it is impossible to stop, just like a drifting boat in a deep mountain canyon, or struggling to reach a vast and rich new homeland, or smashed to pieces in the rapids and rocks. In this business, the newly joined Taigong Lu Shang provided great help to the people of Zhou. Sima Qian's historical records that the Taigong's plans for Wen Wang Zhouchang and Wu Wang's Hufa's father and son were all conspiracies and schemes in secret rooms, most of which were not recorded. But what he can teach Zhou people is more than that. Compared with Zhou people and Jiang people, the civilization of merchants is more developed, and the degree of specialization in division of labor and production efficiency are higher. Take the slaughtering industry that Taigong may have engaged in Kaohsiung City as an example. It's not just a joke from Feng Shenyanyi. In many early civilizations, the profession of butchers was indeed closely related to the status of untouchables. This industry in Shangdu has long since left small workshop operation stage. The slaughtered human meat and bones are fully utilized, and different parts and organs are sorted and classified into the next round of production. In the handicraft workshop area of Yingsu excavated in the 1930s, there was a workshop specialized in processing human leg bones. The preliminarily selected adult leg bones were bundled together, waiting for the next step of fine processing, possibly to make bone hairpins for binding hair. In other workshop areas of the Shang dynasty, there are remains of bowls made of human skulls. Zhou people would not use human bones in this way, but this division of labor and specialized production methods are the real progress that Taigong can bring. Bone Ji, collected by Yin Ruins Museum. Bone hairpin, unearthed from Fuhao Tomb at Yin Ruins, Xiaotan Village, Anyang, Henan. In addition, the young Zhou Fa, King Wu, also married the daughter of the Taigong, and Zhou Gongdan may have married another sister. As a result, the Zhou people renewed their generational marriage with the Jiang people, and the two related tribes finally united under the great cause of destroying business. Part 2. 07. Life restoration. After returning